On the morning I found out my son got married without telling me I was icing a cake I'd baked for his engagement dinner. The frosting was still soft when the phone rang, and I answered with that hopeful flutter mothers get when they see their child's name on the screen. I didn't know that by the time I hung up, every bit of sweetness in that cake and in my heart would taste like chalk. The kitchen smelled of vanilla and butter, warm and familiar, like every other day I'd spent in this house since Robert passed 5 years ago. Outside, the Wisconsin spring was just beginning to unfold the garden beds I'd tended through 28 Wisconsin winters, waiting for my attention. Those flowers were like old friends who never let me down, predictable, grateful for the care I gave them. Unlike some other relationships in my life. Rebecca's voice came through smooth as glass when I answered. "Hi, Margaret." She never called me Mom, though I'd tried to be worthy of the title since Thomas brought her home 4 years ago. "Oh, hi, sweetheart," I said, smiling into the phone, my hands automatically continuing to swirl pale blue frosting along the cake's edge. "I was just finishing the cake for tonight. What time should I come by?" There was a pause long enough for the kitchen clock to tick 3 times. Then she said almost casually, "Oh, about that. You don't have to. We actually got married yesterday." I remember gripping the counter, the frosting knife slipping from my hand and landing with a dull clink on the tile floor. "You what?" "We just did a small ceremony," she said, her voice light and cheerful like she was talking about a trip to the grocery store. Only special people were invited. Those last 4 words hit me like a cold wind. Only special people. I laughed, a small, nervous sound that didn't belong to me. Well, I hope it was beautiful. I would have loved to be there. I tried to hold the word steady, but it trembled anyway, betraying me. Rebecca hesitated, then added, "It was really intimate. We wanted to keep it simple. And before I could find my breath again, she said, 'Anyway, Thomas is busy, but we'll call you later,' and hung up. I stood in the middle of my kitchen phone, still in hand, frosting drying at the edges of the cake like concrete. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint chirp of birds outside. I could almost hear my own heartbeat, heavy and uneven, echoing against the walls. Not special, not invited, not worthy of witnessing my only son's wedding. That was the moment I realized how far I had fallen into their world, into the illusion that money could buy closeness, that love could be rented month by month through automatic payments. For 4 years since Thomas lost his job and temporarily moved in with Rebecca, I'd covered their rent, their car loan, the credit cards, even the furniture delivery that cost more than my first car. Every month I told myself it was temporary, that I was helping them get started. Every month Thomas said, "Thanks, Mom, you're saving us." And every month I felt needed. Now, standing in my quiet kitchen, I saw those words for what they were. Not gratitude, but habit. I walked to the table and sat down. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my tablet. Against my better judgment, I opened social media. It took less than 30 seconds to find it. Rebecca's post. There they were. Thomas in a pale gray suit, smiling at the camera. Rebecca in a white dress that shimmered like sunlight on water. The caption read, "Best day ever. Married my soulmate, surrounded by the people who truly matter." I stared at the photo until the screen blurred. My chest tightened and something inside me cracked. Not like a loud break, but a quiet internal snap that no one else could hear. I scrolled through the comments. Congratulations from friends emojis hearts. Then a familiar name appeared. Rebecca's mother. So proud of you both. It was a perfect day. You two deserve the world. Her mother was there, her cousins, her best friend from college, even the neighbor who borrowed my ladder last month. Everyone but me. It wasn't just that they hadn't invited me. It was that they hadn't even thought to hide it. They didn't consider how I'd feel, because to them my feelings weren't part of the equation. My job was to pay, not to belong. I closed the tablet and looked around my kitchen. The same kitchen where Thomas had sat years earlier, eating his favorite meatloaf and saying, "Mom, once we get through this rough patch, we'll take care of you." The same room where Rebecca once asked me with that sweet smile, "Would you mind covering our internet bill for just a couple months?" Every memory now replayed itself with new meaning. Each thank you, each polite hug, each promise to visit soon was another stitch in the fabric of a lie. I walked to the sink, turned on the tap, and let the cold water run over my hands until I could feel them again. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. At that moment, I just felt hollow, like someone had quietly erased me. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that I should be happy for them, that maybe young people just did things differently now. But the truth wouldn't move. It sat there, solid and undeniable. My son had built a new life and closed the door behind him. That night the house felt heavier than usual. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at the table with only the dim glow from the street lamp outside. The untouched cake sat beside me, frosting stiff and cracked like my heart. I thought of all the nights I'd worried about Thomas. When his car broke down, when he couldn't pay rent, when he said Rebecca was stressed about her job interview and needed a new outfit. I told myself I was doing what any mother would do. But maybe I wasn't helping him. Maybe I was teaching him that I'd always be there no matter how little he cared. The resentment came slowly, almost politely, before settling deep inside. I replayed Rebecca's tone. The way she said special people, the careful lightness of it, like a blade wrapped in silk. She hadn't said it to be cruel. That was the worst part. She said it because she truly believed it. In her mind, I wasn't family. I was background noise. I was the ATM that kept their life functioning but wasn't invited to the celebration. I pressed my palms together and took a long breath. My eyes caught the envelope of bills on the counter. Electricity, property tax, medical insurance. Real life. The things I paid for on my own, the things no one helped me with. Somewhere between that call and the silence that followed, something inside me began to shift. I didn't make any promises or declarations. I didn't cry. I just knew that something had ended and something else was quietly beginning. I scraped the cake into the trash. The sound of it hitting the bin was oddly satisfying. Then I washed the dish, wiped the counter, and poured myself a cup of tea. Outside, the streetlights glowed over the empty road. The world looked the same, but I wasn't the same woman who'd answered the phone that morning. When I finally went to bed, the words kept replaying in my mind. Only special people were invited. I whispered to the dark, almost like a prayer. Then maybe it's time I stopped trying to earn a place that was never offered. And for the first time in years, I fell asleep without setting an alarm to send money the next morning. The morning after I saw the wedding photos, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and a calculator. The coffee had gone cold before I even took the first sip. I wasn't doing anything dramatic, just something practical, adding up every dollar I had sent to Thomas and Rebecca over the last 4 years. Rent, car payments, groceries, birthdays, emergencies. I thought it would be a few thousand, maybe 10. But when the total number appeared on the screen, $47,800, I just stared at it. Almost $50,000. My chest felt tight, as if the air had turned heavier. Each number told a story. The $600 for their new couch, the one Rebecca had described as essential for entertaining. The $2,000 for Thomas's car repair that was supposed to be a one-time thing. The $200 for Rebecca's job interview wardrobe, a wardrobe she apparently no longer needed, according to her most recent social media posts, boasting about being a full-time dog mom. The $250 I sent after their dog got sick. Every time they said thank you, every time I told myself it was fine because I wanted to help. I wanted to believe I was keeping the family together. But now I saw it clearly. I hadn't been keeping us together. I'd been paying rent for a relationship that only existed when they needed something. I kept hearing Rebecca's voice in my head. Only special people were invited. It wasn't even the words themselves. It was the way she said them. Light, casual, without any thought that they might hurt. That tone told me everything. I wasn't special to her. I was useful. I picked up the phone and called my sister Caroline. She was the only person I could talk to without pretending. When she answered, I tried to sound calm, but the words came out flat. "They got married," I said. There was a pause. "Without telling you," she asked, her voice full of disbelief. "Not only without telling me," I said. "Without even inviting me. Rebecca said they only invited special people." Caroline let out a long sigh. "Oh, Maggie." She didn't need to say more. She'd warned me years ago that I was giving too much, that Thomas and Rebecca were taking advantage of me. I had defended them back then, saying they were just struggling, that things would get better. Now her silence on the other end of the line said everything I didn't want to admit. "I thought I was helping them start their life," I whispered. "But maybe I was just making it easy for them to forget me." "You were trying to love them," she said gently. "But love isn't something you buy. You can't fix people by paying their bills." Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I had been trying to buy my way into my son's life, one transfer at a time. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. My finger hovered over the scheduled payments tab. There they were, 2 transfers set for the first of each month, rent and car payment. Just seeing them made my stomach twist. I'd set them up years ago so I wouldn't forget, so Thomas and Rebecca wouldn't have to worry. I clicked cancel on both. The screen asked if I was sure. I clicked yes. It was such a small action, just a few clicks, but it felt like I'd lifted a weight off my shoulders. I stared at the confirmation message for a long time. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the room. For the first time in years, I wasn't tied to their bills, their late notices, or their apologies. I expected to feel guilty right away, but what I felt was something else. Something close to relief. It scared me a little, that sense of calm. I thought about Thomas's voice saying, "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." I used to live for that sentence. Now it sounded like a script he had practiced too many times. I walked through the house, looking at the small signs of my life, the photos on the walls, the quiet order I'd built after Robert passed. This home had always been my safe place. Yet somehow I had let my son's problems fill it with noise and worry. Every time my phone buzzed, I'd tense, afraid it was another request for money disguised as a casual check-in. Now, for the first time, I looked at the phone and felt no fear. By evening, the house felt different, lighter maybe. I made myself dinner. Something simple, just soup and bread, and ate at the table without checking my messages. It struck me how quiet peace can be. No dramatic speeches, no slammed doors, just the click of a button and the sound of a woman finally deciding she's done being taken for granted. Still, resentment lingered beneath the calm. I couldn't forget how easily they'd erased me from one of the most important days of their lives. I thought about Rebecca's smile in those photos, about the people standing beside her. I imagined them toasting, laughing, not once wondering where I was or how I'd feel. It hurt in a quiet, deep way, like a bruise that would take a long time to fade. Before bed, I wrote one sentence on a notepad I kept by the couch. Stop paying for love. Then I turned off the lights and went to bed early. The house was silent, but my heart wasn't. It was adjusting, learning what it felt like to stop chasing people who only remembered me when the rent was due. For the first time in a long while, I didn't dream about Thomas or Rebecca. I just slept. 2 weeks passed without a word from them. The silence felt strange at first, like a missing background noise you don't realize you've grown used to. No text about unexpected bills, no cheerful emojis from Rebecca, no reminders that rent was due, just quiet. I spent those days in my garden, trimming the roses, breathing in the crisp spring air. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, but deep down I knew it wouldn't last. On a Thursday morning, my phone rang while I was watering the tulips. I didn't recognize the number right away, but the tone in Rebecca's voice hit me like an old bruise. "Margaret," she said, using that careful, polite tone she saved for when she wanted something. "We've been trying to reach you. The rent didn't go through. Our landlord's threatening to evict us." I wiped my hands on my jeans and sat down on the porch step. "Yes," I said. "I know." She went quiet for a moment. Then in a shaky voice, she asked, "What do you mean you know I stopped the transfers?" I said plainly. "The payments are done." For a few seconds, I heard nothing but her breathing. Then came the disbelief. "You stopped them? Margaret, that rent is due today. We don't have the money." I could almost picture her pacing in that apartment I'd paid for, clutching the phone like it was a lifeline. Once that image would have broken me, but not anymore. "I understand," I said softly. "You'll figure it out. Figure it out." Her voice grew sharper. "Do you have any idea what we're dealing with? We could lose our home. Thomas has been stressed for weeks. You could have at least warned us." There it was, the shift. Not gratitude, not remorse, just blame. Somehow I was still responsible for their choices. I closed my eyes, letting the wind brush my face. "Rebecca," I said, "when you told me you got married and said you only invited special people. Do you remember that?" Her breath hitched. "This isn't the time to know," I interrupted, calm but firm. "It is the time. Because that panic you feel right now, the knot in your stomach, the way you can't believe this is happening, that's exactly how I felt that morning." Silence. For once, she had no clever response. I could hear her swallow. Then her voice softened, almost pleading. "Margaret, please. You know Thomas didn't mean to hurt you. He's just bad at planning things. He's been under so much pressure." I felt a spark of the old guilt rise up. The instinct to protect, to fix, to make everything better for my child, no matter the cost to myself. I almost gave in. Almost said I'd send one more payment. But then I looked at the garden, the sunlight catching on the petals I'd tended myself. That peace I'd built would vanish the moment I said yes. Rebecca, I said quietly, I've spent 4 years helping you both. I've covered your rent, your car, your groceries. I wanted to help you build your life together. But instead, I just built a wall between us. There was a pause before she whispered, "So that's it. You're just done helping us." "Yes," I said. "I'm done." She started crying soft at first, then louder like she wanted me to hear every tear. But something about it felt practiced familiar. I realized I'd heard the same cry before. After every time I said no to a small request, every time I hesitated to pay a bill. It was a sound she used like a key unlocking my guilt. This time it didn't fit. While she cried, I remembered another day years ago when Thomas was 16. He'd crashed Robert's car into a mailbox. My husband was angry, but I'd begged him not to punish Thomas too harshly. He just made a mistake, I'd said. He needs our understanding. That night I stayed up with Thomas while he sulked and promised to do better. The next morning, Robert told me quietly, "You're teaching him that he'll never face consequences." I'd brushed it off, but now his words echoed in my mind. "I know this is hard," I told Rebecca when her sobs quieted, "but it's time for you and Thomas to learn how to stand on your own. That's what being married means." Her voice changed again, turning cold. "You're being cruel. Thomas will be heartbroken when he finds out you've done this." I felt a chill move through me, but not from her words, from how little they affected me. "Then he'll have to learn to live with disappointment," I said. "We all do." There was another pause, longer this time, and then the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a moment, then set it down beside me. The garden was quiet again, except for the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. I thought that would be the end of it, but that night Thomas called. His voice was low, tense. "Mom, what's going on? Rebecca said you canceled the payments." "I did," I said. "You're married now. You both need to handle your bills." He let out a bitter laugh. "So you're just cutting us off after everything." I wanted to remind him of what everything meant. Every time I'd bailed them out, every time I'd gone without, so they could have more. Instead, I stayed quiet. "I can't believe you'd do this," he said. "You always said family sticks together." I took a deep breath. "Family does stick together," I said softly, "but not when love turns into dependence. That's not family. That's survival." For a second, I thought he might understand. Then he said Rebecca was right. "You just want to control us." That one stung. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window at the streetlights glowing against the night sky. "No," I said finally. "I just want my life back." He hung up without another word. I sat there for a long time listening to the quiet hum of the house. The loneliness crept in, but it didn't hurt like it used to. It felt clean, honest. The kind of quiet that belongs to someone who's finally told the truth. When I went outside again, the air had cooled. The stars were faint but steady above the garden. I realized something then. They might lose their apartment. They might call me names. They might never forgive me. But for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid. I stood there for a while, feeling the night air against my skin, and whispered to myself, "I've been afraid of losing them for years." But they lost me long before this call. The next morning, I decided to take Caroline's advice. I'd been so caught up in Thomas and Rebecca's drama that I'd neglected my own friends, my own interests. The local garden club was meeting that afternoon. I'd always meant to join, but had never found the time, or rather I'd always prioritized being available for Thomas's emergencies over doing something for myself. I dressed carefully, put on lipstick for the first time in months, and drove to the community center. Walking into a room full of strangers was harder than I expected. I'd grown so accustomed to my quiet house, my silent phone, the predictable rhythm of waiting for the next crisis. But as I introduced myself and settled into a chair, something unexpected happened. People listened when I spoke. They asked questions about my garden. They invited me to the next meeting without checking if I had something more important to do. That evening, as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked outside my house. My heart sank when I recognized Rebecca sitting on my porch steps. She stood when she saw me, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Margaret," she said, "may I come in? I just want to talk." I hesitated, then nodded, unlocking the door and letting her follow me inside. She glanced around as if she hadn't been here dozens of times before, as if the photos of Thomas growing up on the walls were new to her. "I'm not here to argue," she said, setting her purse down carefully. "I just wanted to say we're sorry. We really are. Thomas didn't mean to hurt you. Neither did I. I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air. I'd learned that silence made people reveal more than questions ever could. She kept talking, filling the space with words that sounded rehearsed. We've been struggling. The landlord's been calling nonstop. I told Thomas I'd come talk to you because maybe we could make things right. We could pay you back little by little. Maybe sign something official. She said official, like it was a gift, as if a promise on paper could erase 4 years of taking. I appreciate that, I said softly. But no, Rebecca, there won't be any more payments, and you don't need to pay me back. Her eyes lit up for a second, misunderstanding me. So you'll start helping again? I shook my head. No, I mean I don't want anything from you. I'm moving on. Her face fell, and the polite mask she'd been wearing cracked. Margaret, you can't just cut us off. You're family. I let out a quiet breath. Family isn't about who takes the most, Rebecca. It's about respect. And you showed me exactly how much you respect me when you left me out of your wedding. She looked down, her voice barely a whisper. That wasn't my idea. Maybe not, I said. But you didn't stop it either. The room felt heavy. For the first time, I saw her not as my son's wife, but as a grown woman who had chosen comfort over conscience the same way I'd chosen silence over self-respect for years. I went to see my lawyer this week, I said. We updated my will. I made sure my finances are protected now. No one else can touch them. She blinked, confused. Why would you do that? Because I've learned, I said. Helping people who don't value you isn't kindness. It's surrender. I've done enough surrendering. She sat back, folding her arms, trying to keep her composure. You make it sound like we're the bad guys. We were just trying to build a life. You were, I agreed. But you built it on my money and my guilt. That's not a life. It's dependence. Her voice broke. You're punishing us. I shook my head. No, Rebecca. I'm freeing myself. That was the moment something inside me settled. The years of resentment, guilt, and longing didn't vanish, but they stopped controlling me. I realized I didn't owe anyone an explanation for wanting peace. Rebecca wiped her eyes, still trying to find an angle. If you just give us a few more months, we could get back on our feet. Thomas has a new job. The pay is decent, but we need time to save up. So he does have a job, I asked, my suspicion confirmed. How long? She hesitated, caught in the lie. 2 months, but it's not enough yet. We're still catching up. I stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. You're married now. Getting on your feet is part of that. I had to learn it too after Robert died. Her expression changed from pleading to angry. You act like you've never needed help. Oh, I have, I said quietly. But when people helped me, I said thank you. And I didn't forget them when good things happened. She had no answer for that. The silence stretched between us. After a moment, she picked up her purse and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned and said, Thomas isn't going to understand this. You might lose him over it. I met her eyes. Then maybe it's time he learns what losing something feels like. She left without another word. I closed the door, leaned against it for a moment, and listened to the sound of her car fading down the street. Instead of sadness, I felt a strange calm. For the first time in years, my house felt like mine again. Quiet, safe, whole. That evening, I made myself tea and looked at the brochure from the garden club. They were planning a trip to the botanical gardens next month. I decided I would go. I would plant new flowers, make new friends, build a life that didn't revolve around waiting for my phone to ring with another crisis. As I got ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked different somehow. Not younger, not older, just more present. The woman looking back at me wasn't defined by what she gave to others, but by what she had finally reclaimed for herself. I thought about the cake I'd been decorating when Rebecca called. How quickly sweetness can turn bitter. But also how sometimes what seems like an ending is really the beginning of something else, something true. I'll use my computer to create part 2 of the story following your requirements exactly. The week after Rebecca's visit passed in a strange sort of limbo. I kept expecting to hear from Thomas, a phone call, a text message, something to show he cared beyond what I could give him financially. My phone remained silent. Each morning I checked it, half hoping to see his name. Each morning, disappointment settled over me like morning dew present, but quick to evaporate in the light of my new resolve. I spent those quiet days rethinking the past 4 years, each memory now colored by the knowledge that I had been not a mother, but a resource. The time Thomas called from a gas station stranded without money, and I'd driven 30 miles at midnight to help him. The Christmas Rebecca had casually mentioned how much she loved a particular bracelet, and I'd scraped together the money to buy it only to see it worn once and forgotten. The countless dinners I'd cooked where they arrived late and left early, always with a fresh financial crisis that needed solving before they walked out the door. The garden club became my sanctuary. I went twice that week helping to plan the upcoming botanical garden trip. The members, mostly women my age or older, welcomed me with an easy acceptance I hadn't experienced in years. They didn't need anything from me except conversation and occasionally an opinion about hydrangeas. The simplicity of those interactions made me realize how complicated and exhausting my relationship with Thomas and Rebecca had become. On Wednesday, I received an invitation to join some of the garden club ladies for lunch. My first instinct was to check if Thomas might call to keep that time slot open just in case. The realization that I was still organizing my life around a possibility that had never materialized hit me like a physical blow. I accepted the lunch invitation immediately. The restaurant wasn't fancy, just a small local place with checkered tablecloths and homemade pies in a rotating display case. But sitting there with these women laughing about gardening disasters and sharing stories about grandchildren, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced since before Robert died. No one was asking me for anything. No one was making me feel guilty for having boundaries. We were just people enjoying each other's company. As I drove home, I passed the credit union where I'd spent countless hours setting up automatic transfers to Thomas's account. On impulse, I pulled into the parking lot and went inside. The same financial advisor who had helped me establish those transfers greeted me with a smile. "Margaret, it's been a while. What can I do for you today? I want to open a savings account," I said. "Something just for me." She didn't ask questions, just nodded and started the paperwork. When she asked what I wanted to name the account, I hesitated only a moment before saying, "New beginnings." "That's perfect," she smiled. "And what's this account saving toward? I hadn't thought that far ahead." For years, all my extra money had gone to Thomas and Rebecca. The concept of saving for myself seemed almost foreign. Then it came to me the dream Robert and I had shared before his illness took everything. "A trip to the coast," I said. "The Maine coastline. We always wanted to see the lighthouses." As she finished setting up the account, I realized I was smiling. Not the tight, worried smile I'd worn for years, but something genuine that reached all the way to my eyes. I transferred $500 into the new account money that would have gone to Thomas's rent next month, and left with a sense of purpose I'd almost forgotten. That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. My neighbor Walter, an elderly widower who had lived next door for decades, waved from his yard where he was retrieving his mail. We'd been friendly but distant for years, both of us too wrapped up in our own troubles to do more than exchange pleasantries. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" he called. Instead of just nodding and going inside as I usually did, I agreed and asked if he'd like to join me for iced tea. The surprise on his face probably matched my own at the spontaneous invitation. Walter settled into the chair beside me, and we talked as the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. He told me about his late wife, about their 50 years together, about how he still made coffee for two every morning before remembering she was gone. I shared stories about Robert, about teaching for 30 years, about Thomas as a child, the sweet boy who once existed before he became the man who saw me as nothing more than financial support. "Have you heard from him since Walter asked when I told him about the wedding and its aftermath?" "No," I said. "And I'm beginning to think I won't unless I reach out first or they need something." "Then they'll learn what real need is," Walter said quietly. "Not the need for things or money, but the need for people who love you, regardless of what you can give them." His words stayed with me long after he'd gone home. I realized I'd spent so long trying to be needed by Thomas that I'd forgotten what it was like to be wanted to have someone in my life who chose to be there, not because of what I could provide, but simply because they enjoyed my company. Thursday morning, my phone finally rang. I felt the old flutter of hope when I saw Thomas's name on the screen, immediately followed by the caution I was learning to embrace. "Mom," I was calling about the rent situation, his voice tight with what I recognized as his trying to control his anger tone. "The landlord gave us until the end of the week. I thought maybe we could work something out." No greeting, no asking how I was, just straight to what he needed. Something in me that had been holding on some last vestige of hope that he might have reflected on his actions finally let go. "I see," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "Have you looked into payment plans with the landlord? Or possibly finding a less expensive place?" He made a sound between a scoff and a laugh. "We signed a lease, Mom. We can't just leave. And we don't have time to find a new place, even if we could break it. That's why I'm calling you. I closed my eyes, remembering Walter's words about the difference between being needed and being wanted. Thomas needed my money. He didn't want me. I understand this is difficult, I said. But as I told Rebecca, I'm not going to be making those payments anymore. So you're really going through with this, he said, his voice rising. You're going to let us get evicted because of some petty feelings about a wedding. Do you have any idea how selfish that is? The old me would have crumbled under the weight of that accusation. The new me recognized it for what it was, manipulation. This isn't about the wedding anymore, Thomas. This is about you and Rebecca learning to be independent adults. You're married now. Part of marriage is figuring out how to solve problems together without relying on your parents to bail you out. His voice turned cold. I never thought you'd be the kind of mother who abandons her kid when things get tough. And I never thought you'd be the kind of son who only calls his mother when he needs money, I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Let's be honest, Thomas. If I paid your rent this month, what about next month? And the month after that, when does it end? The silence that followed told me he hadn't considered that question. In his mind, I was a permanent solution to his temporary problems, except the problems never stayed temporary. We could pay you back, he finally said, echoing Rebecca's earlier offer. We just need some time to get on our feet. You've had 4 years, I said quietly. And according to Rebecca, you've had a job for the past 2 months that you didn't tell me about. He swore under his breath. She told you that? Yes, just like she told me you've been saving for a vacation while I've been paying your bills. Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had that dangerous calm that always preceded his biggest tantrums as a child. Fine. If that's how you want to play this, we'll figure it out ourselves. But don't expect to be part of our lives going forward. You've made your choice. The threat hung in the air between us. Once it would have been enough to make me give in immediately. Now it just clarified what I already suspected: his love was conditional on what I could provide. That's not a choice, Thomas. That's blackmail, and it won't work anymore. He hung up without another word. I set the phone down and waited for the wave of grief and guilt to hit me. It came, but not as strongly as before. Each time I stood my ground, the aftermath became more bearable. I took a deep breath and picked up my gardening gloves. The roses needed pruning, and I needed the comfort of doing something with my hands, while my heart processed yet another painful conversation. As I worked in the garden, snipping away dead branches to make room for new growth, I thought about how similar this process was to what I was doing in my life, cutting away the parts that no longer served me, that were draining my energy without giving anything in return. It hurt to cut those branches, just as it hurt to set boundaries with Thomas. But both were necessary for health and future blooming. By early afternoon, I had filled 3-yard waste bags with trimmings, and my mind had cleared somewhat. I went inside to wash up and found an email from Caroline. She was planning to visit next weekend and wanted to know if that would work for me. I wrote back immediately, grateful for the prospect of seeing my sister, the one person who had seen through Thomas and Rebecca from the beginning. The rest of the day passed quietly. I made myself a proper dinner, something I'd gotten out of the habit of doing when it was just me, and ate at the table instead of standing at the counter or sitting in front of the television. Small acts of self-respect that had once seemed pointless now felt important. Just as I was clearing my plate, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and a flutter of anxiety passed through me at the thought that it might be Thomas or Rebecca again. Instead, I opened the door to find my neighbor Walter holding a small potted plant. I grew too many tomato seedlings, he explained with a slightly embarrassed smile. Thought you might like one for your garden. I accepted the plant, touched by the simple kindness of the gesture. We ended up sitting on the porch again, talking until the mosquitoes drove us inside. As I said goodnight, he mentioned a local music in the park event happening that weekend, and asked if I might want to go. I'd love to, I said, surprised to find I meant it. Friday morning, I woke to multiple missed calls from an unknown number and a voicemail that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Wells, this is James Parker from Wisconsin First Bank. I'm calling about some concerning activity on your account. Please call me back as soon as possible at this number. I called immediately, my mind racing through possibilities. Had my account been hacked? Was there fraud? The banker's voice was professionally concerned. Mrs. Wells, thank you for returning my call. I wanted to check with you about a withdrawal attempt that was made yesterday afternoon. Someone tried to transfer $5,000 from your savings account using your online banking credentials. My heart pounded. I didn't authorize that. Was the transfer stopped? Yes, ma'am. Our security system flagged it as suspicious because it was going to an account not previously linked to yours. We put a hold on it pending your verification, which is why I'm calling. Relief washed over me quickly, followed by a sickening realization. Only one other person had ever had access to my online banking, Thomas. Years ago, I'd given him my password during a hospital stay so he could help me pay bills. I'd never changed it. I'd like to change all my passwords and security questions, I told the banker. And can you tell me the name on the account where the money was being sent? I'm afraid I can't disclose that information, Mrs. Wells. But I can tell you that we've flagged this as an attempted unauthorized access, and will be pursuing it accordingly. Would you like to file a police report? The question hung in the air. Filing a report would mean potentially pressing charges against my own son. The thought made me physically ill. Can I think about it and let you know, I asked. Of course. In the meantime, we'll help you secure your accounts. I spent the next hour on the phone changing passwords, setting up two-factor authentication, and placing additional security measures on all my accounts. The banker was patient and kind, never making me feel foolish for having been so trusting. When we finished, he gently suggested I consider the police report again. In my experience, Mrs. Wells, people who try this once often try again. A report creates a paper trail that can help protect you. I'll think about it, I promised, though the very idea made my chest tighten with anxiety. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table trying to process what had happened. Thomas, or possibly Rebecca, using my information Thomas had shared, had attempted to take $5,000 from my account without my knowledge or permission. This wasn't a case of me refusing to help them. This was theft. The realization crashed over me like a wave threatening to pull me under. This was who my son had become, someone who would steal from his own mother rather than face the consequences of his actions. The pain was almost physical, a burning ache behind my ribs that made it hard to breathe. I called Caroline, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. They tried to steal from me, I said when she answered, my voice breaking. Thomas or Rebecca, I don't know which, but they tried to transfer money from my account without asking. Caroline's sharp intake of breath was followed by a string of expletives that would have shocked me under any other circumstances. You need to file a police report, Maggie. This isn't just taking advantage anymore. This is a crime. He's my son, I whispered, tears finally coming. And you're his mother, she countered, her voice gentler. Which means you have a responsibility to hold him accountable for his actions, not to protect him from consequences he's earned. We talked for nearly an hour, working through my tangled emotions. By the end, I'd agreed to call the bank back and file the report. Not because I wanted to punish Thomas, but because I needed to protect myself. And because, as Caroline pointed out, allowing him to face consequences now might be the only chance he had to change his path before he did something that would result in more serious legal trouble. After making that difficult call, I felt drained but strangely peaceful. I had done what needed to be done. The bank assured me they would handle things from here, and that I likely wouldn't need to do anything else unless the case went to court, which was unlikely for a first offense that had been stopped before any money changed hands. That afternoon, I received a text from Rebecca. How could you report Thomas to the police? He was just trying to get what you promised us. You're tearing this family apart. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be twisted and used against me. Instead, I blocked her number, then Thomas's as well. The bank had recommended cutting off contact while they investigated, and I knew it was the right thing to do, no matter how much it hurt. That evening, I received a call from Laura, one of the women from the garden club. She was hosting a small dinner party the following night and wanted to know if I could come. The normalcy of the invitation was like a life raft in the stormy sea my life had become. I accepted gratefully. Saturday arrived with unexpected sunshine after a week of cloudy skies. I spent the morning at the farmer's market, something I'd stopped doing when money was tight due to supporting Thomas and Rebecca. The simple pleasure of selecting fresh produce and chatting with local vendors lifted my spirits. I bought ingredients to make a salad for Laura's dinner party and splurged on a bouquet of fresh flowers for my kitchen table, a small luxury that represented my new commitment to valuing myself. As I walked back to my car, I spotted Walter across the street, examining a display of woodworking tools at an outdoor sale. I waved and he jogged over, offering to carry my bags. We ended up getting coffee at a small cafe sitting outside in the spring sunshine and talking about everything from politics to gardening techniques. You seem different today, he observed as we finished our drinks. Lighter somehow. I thought about the bank incident, about blocking Thomas and Rebecca's numbers, about the painful but necessary steps I was taking to protect myself. I'm learning that sometimes you have to let go of what's hurting you, especially if it's something you love, I said. It's not easy, but it's necessary. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. When Linda was dying, my wife, she made me promise not to hold on too tight. Let me go when it's time, she said. Hardest promise I ever had to keep. I reached out impulsively and squeezed his hand. Thank you for understanding. His weathered fingers closed around mine briefly before we both pulled away, a little embarrassed, but smiling. The dinner party that evening was at Laura's Victorian home on the other side of town. 6 women from the garden club, all around my age, all with their own stories of loss and renewal. As we ate Laura's excellent lasagna and drank perhaps a bit too much wine, the conversation turned to family difficulties. I found myself sharing the condensed version of my situation with Thomas and Rebecca. Instead of the judgment I feared, I received nods of recognition and shared stories. Brenda's daughter had struggled with addiction for years, draining her savings before finally getting help. Diane's son had married a woman who systematically cut him off from his entire family. Helen's grandson had stolen her identity and run up thousands in debt before she discovered it. These stories weren't shared with bitterness or to compete for who had suffered most. They were offered as a form of solidarity, a way of saying you are not alone. We have weathered these storms too. You will survive this. You know what my therapist told me during my daughter's worst years? Brenda said, refilling wine glasses around the table. She said, your job as a mother is not to prevent your adult children from experiencing pain. It's to stop enabling behaviors that will ultimately cause them more pain. The words hit me like a revelation. All this time, I'd thought I was protecting Thomas from hardship. In reality, I'd been preventing him from developing the strength and skills he needed to face life's inevitable challenges. The evening continued with lighter topics, books we'd read, shows we'd watched, the upcoming botanical garden trip. By the time I left, I felt connected to these women in a way I hadn't felt connected to anyone in years. They had seen my pain and my shame, and they had met it with acceptance and understanding. Sunday morning, I woke to find an email from Thomas. Despite everything, my heart leapt at the sight of his name in my inbox. Old habits die hard, I suppose. The message was brief. I don't know why you're doing this to us, but I hope it makes you happy. Rebecca and I are moving to her parents' house since we can't afford rent thanks to you. I guess family only matters when it's convenient for you. Don't bother contacting me again. The words stung, but not as deeply as they would have even a week ago. The distance I'd created both emotionally and practically was working. I could see the manipulation in his message now, the attempt to place all blame on me and take none for himself. I wrote a reply, then deleted it without sending. Then wrote another and deleted that too. Finally, I settled on, I'm sorry you feel that way, Thomas. I love you and wish you well with your in-laws. My door remains open if you ever want to really talk about rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then closed my laptop and got ready for the day. Walter and I had plans to attend the Music in the Park event that afternoon, and I was looking forward to it. The local park was filled with families and couples sitting on blankets and lawn chairs, enjoying the community orchestra's spring concert. Walter brought a picnic basket with sandwiches and lemonade. We found a spot under a sprawling oak tree and settled in to listen to Vivaldi's Four Seasons, coincidentally Robert's favorite piece. As the music washed over me, I found myself thinking about the seasons of my own life. The spring of youth and new beginnings, the summer of marriage and motherhood, the autumn of watching Thomas grow up and leave home, the winter of Robert's illness and death, and now unexpectedly a new spring, a season of rediscovery and renewal I hadn't anticipated. Walter's presence beside me was comfortable and demanding. We didn't need to fill every silence with words. Between musical selections, we talked about our lives, our losses, our unexpected joy at finding friendship at this stage of life. It wasn't romantic, we were both still carrying our departed spouses in our hearts, but it was intimate in its own way, the intimacy of shared experience and mutual respect. Monday morning brought reality crashing back. An official-looking letter arrived from the bank detailing the attempted fraud and explaining that they had reported it to the authorities as required by law. A detective would be contacting me to take my statement. The clinical language made the situation seem somehow both more serious and less personal. A crime had been attempted and procedures were being followed. I had just finished reading the letter when the phone rang. A Detective Morales from the county sheriff's office wanted to know if he could stop by to discuss the incident. I agreed, my stomach churning with anxiety. Detective Morales arrived promptly at 11 a.m., a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He took notes as I explained the situation, including my complicated history with Thomas and Rebecca. So you believe your son or daughter-in-law attempted to transfer funds from your account using your credentials, which you had previously shared with your son during a hospital stay several years ago, he summarized when I finished. Yes, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. That's what I believe. He nodded, making another note. And you want to press charges. The question hung in the air between us. Could I send my own son to court, possibly to jail, if this wasn't his first offense? The thought made me physically ill. But then I remembered Caroline's words about responsibility and consequences. I want to do whatever is necessary to protect myself, I said carefully. But if there's any way to resolve this without criminal charges... The detective's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Wells, in cases like this involving family, we understand the complexity. The fact that no money was actually transferred makes this attempted fraud rather than completed fraud. That gives us some flexibility. I exhaled, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. Here's what I suggest, he continued. We'll complete the investigation. If the evidence points to your son or daughter-in-law, we'll bring them in for questioning. Sometimes just the reality check of sitting in a police station answering questions is enough to prevent future attempts. We'll make it clear that this time you're choosing not to press charges, but that any future attempts will result in prosecution. Relief flooded through me. This was the balance I was looking for, consequences serious enough to make an impression, but not so severe as to permanently damage Thomas's future. After the detective left, I called Caroline to update her. She was supportive of my decision, though I could tell she had reservations. Just promise me you won't let them back into your finances no matter what sob story they come up with next, she said. I promise, I replied, and I meant it. The bridge of financial support had been burned not by me, but by their attempt to take what wasn't freely given. Tuesday passed quietly. I attended a garden club meeting, went grocery shopping, and started researching the Maine coastal trip I was saving for. Small, ordinary activities that were slowly rebuilding my sense of self as someone who existed apart from Thomas and his needs. Wednesday brought another piece of mail that made my hands shake. A credit card statement for an account I didn't recognize. I opened it cautiously, then felt the blood drain from my face as I read. The card was in my name, but had been sent to Thomas and Rebecca's address. The balance was over $12,000. I called the credit card company immediately, my voice rising in panic as I explained I had never applied for this card. The customer service representative was sympathetic but firm. Someone with my social security number and other identifying information had opened the account 6 months ago. All the security questions had been answered correctly. The only unusual thing was the different mailing address, which wasn't unusual enough to flag the application. I spent hours on the phone filing fraud reports, freezing my credit, and speaking with increasingly higher levels of management at the credit card company. By the end, they had agreed to investigate the fraud and close the account, but the process of disputing the charges would take time. Meanwhile, my credit score had taken a significant hit. When I finally hung up, exhausted and shaking, I called Detective Morales to update him on this new development. He listened carefully, then said he would add it to the investigation. Mrs. Wells, with this new information, I have to ask again. Do you want to press charges? This is a clear case of identity theft, and the amount is significant enough to potentially result in felony charges. The weight of the decision pressed on me like a physical burden. I thought of Thomas as a child, his small hand in mine as we crossed the street. I thought of the young man who had helped care for Robert during his final months. And I thought of the stranger he had become, someone who would steal his mother's identity and rack up debt in her name. I need time to think, I told the detective. I understand, he replied. But please don't take too long. The more evidence we can gather while the trail is fresh, the better. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the wall without seeing it. The magnitude of what Thomas or Rebecca or both of them had done was slowly sinking in. This wasn't a one-time desperate attempt. This was calculated ongoing fraud that had begun months ago while they were still accepting my voluntary financial help. I called Walter, needing a friendly voice to anchor me in this storm. When I explained what had happened, his usual gentle manner gave way to righteous anger. Margaret, this isn't just taking advantage anymore. This is criminal. If they've done it to you, their own mother, they'll do it to anyone. You have to report this fully. But he's my son. I whispered the words catching in my throat. Yes, and you raised him to know right from wrong. You can love him and still hold him accountable. In fact, that might be the most loving thing you can do right now. His words echoed what Caroline had said, what the women at the dinner party had implied. Sometimes love meant allowing consequences. Sometimes the kindest action wasn't the easiest one. I told Walter I needed to think, and he respected that, offering to come over if I wanted company, but not pushing when I declined. After we hung up, I went to my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, where I kept a small photo album of Thomas's childhood. I turned the pages slowly, watching him grow from a grinning toddler to a serious teenager to a young adult in cap and gown at his high school graduation. Where had that young man gone? When had he turned into someone who could steal from his own mother? Was it my fault for giving too much, for making it too easy? I closed the album and returned it to the drawer. Whatever mistakes I had made as a mother, they didn't excuse Thomas's actions. He was an adult who had made his own choices, and now he needed to face the consequences of those choices. I picked up the phone and called Detective Morales back. I want to press charges, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. And I want to make a full statement about everything, the attempted bank transfer and the fraudulent credit card. Are you sure about this, Mrs. Wells? He asked gently. Once we move forward, it will be difficult to change course. I'm sure, I said, and as the words left my mouth, I knew they were true. I love my son, but I can't protect him from himself anymore. He needs to understand that actions have consequences. After hanging up, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. Grief for the relationship that might now be permanently damaged, for the son I had lost long before this moment. Relief that I was finally standing firm in my own truth, protecting myself as I should have done years ago. I called Caroline to tell her my decision. She was quiet for a moment, then said simply, I'm proud of you, Maggie. This took courage. Her approval meant more than she could know. For so long I had dismissed her warnings about Thomas, and Rebecca had chosen the illusion of closeness with my son over the reality my sister could see clearly. Now I was finally listening to her, to myself, to the truth I had been avoiding for years. That night I slept fitfully, dreams of Thomas as a child mingling with nightmares about courtrooms and jail cells. I woke early, made coffee, and sat on my porch watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The world kept turning regardless of my personal drama. There was something comforting in that constancy. Detective Morales called mid-morning to schedule a formal interview at the station the following day. As I hung up, my hands trembling slightly, I reminded myself that this was necessary, not just to protect myself, but perhaps in some roundabout way to help Thomas find his way back to the person he was meant to be. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. I cleaned the house thoroughly, something I always did when stressed. I prepared a casserole for Walter, who had mentioned he was terrible at cooking for one. I called Laura to confirm details for the botanical garden trip that weekend. Ordinary actions that grounded me in the midst of extraordinary circumstances. That evening, as I watered my garden, Walter came over with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Thought you might need this? He said simply. We sat on the porch, sipping wine and watching fireflies begin to appear in the deepening twilight. Neither of us spoke much, but his presence was a comfort, solid and undemanding. You know what the hardest part is, I said finally. It's not the money or even the betrayal. It's knowing that he still doesn't understand what he's done wrong. In his mind, I'm the villain in this story. Walter nodded, his expression thoughtful. My father used to say, the truth doesn't stop being the truth just because someone refuses to see it. Your son might not understand now or next year or even 5 years from now, but reality has a way of asserting itself eventually. I smiled despite the heaviness in my heart. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Walter agreed. And he also used to say that good people sometimes make terrible mistakes. The measure of a person isn't in never failing, but in how they respond when confronted with their failures. I thought about that as we finished our wine in companionable silence. Thomas had made terrible mistakes, would continue to make them most likely, but perhaps someday he would face those mistakes and choose a different path. All I could do was hold firm to my boundaries and hope that eventually he would understand. As Walter rose to leave, he hesitated, then said quietly, Whatever happens tomorrow, remember you're not alone in this. You have people who care about you for you, not for what you can give them. His words warmed me more than the wine had. Thank you, I said, meaning it from the bottom of my heart. After he left, I stood in my garden for a long while, looking up at the stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring challenges I never expected to face. But tonight, in this moment, I was at peace with my decision. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I was putting myself first, not out of selfishness, but out of the deep understanding that I could not pour from an empty cup. I was done being the ATM, the safety net, the enabler. From now on, I would be simply Margaret, a woman reclaiming her life one difficult decision at a time. I'll use my computer to create part 3 of the story, following your requirements exactly. The police station smelled of industrial cleaner and burnt coffee. I sat in a small room with Detective Morales and a female officer who introduced herself as Detective Chen. The metal chair felt cold through my thin slacks as I recounted the entire story. The wedding I wasn't invited to, the years of financial support, the attempted bank transfer, and now the fraudulent credit card. My voice remained steady, even as I described my own son's betrayal in clinical detail. The tape recorder between us hummed softly, capturing every word. "If you don't mind my asking, Mrs. Wells," Detective Chen's voice was gentle but direct. "Why did you continue supporting them financially for so long?" The question caught me off guard. No one had asked me that before. Not Caroline, not Walter, not even myself in those most honest middle-of-the-night reflections. I suppose I thought I was buying closeness. I admitted the truth of it washing over me in that fluorescent-lit room. I thought if I gave enough, did enough, eventually Thomas would see me as someone worth loving just for being his mother, not for what I could provide. Detective Morales nodded like he'd heard similar stories before. Family fraud cases are among the most difficult we deal with. The violation of trust cuts deeper than the financial loss. After I finished giving my statement, Detective Chen walked me through the process of what would happen next. They would investigate further, likely bringing Thomas and Rebecca in for questioning. If the evidence supported it, which she assured me it almost certainly would, charges would be filed. "This could result in court appearances for you," she explained. "Are you prepared for that possibility?" I thought about seeing Thomas in a courtroom, possibly in handcuffs. My stomach clenched, but I nodded. "I'll do whatever is necessary." As I stood to leave, Detective Morales handed me his card. "Call anytime, day or night, if you think of anything else. Or if you just need to talk. We understand how isolating this can be." His kindness nearly broke my composure in a way that recounting the fraud hadn't. I thanked him with a slightly trembling voice and walked out into the bright spring sunshine, feeling both lighter and heavier at once. Caroline was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against her car. She'd driven 3 hours to be there for my statement, arriving just after I'd gone inside. She enveloped me in a hug that smelled of her familiar perfume, the same scent she'd worn since college. "How did it go?" Her arm remained around my shoulders as we walked to her car. "It's done," I said, surprised at the finality in my own voice. "They'll investigate and likely press charges. I might have to testify." We drove back to my house in companionable silence. Caroline had always been good at knowing when I needed to talk and when I needed quiet. When we arrived, she insisted on making lunch while I changed out of the formal clothes I'd worn to the police station. In my bedroom, I caught sight of myself in the mirror, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I recognized myself. Not as Thomas's mother or Robert's widow, but as Margaret Wells, a woman reclaiming her life one difficult step at a time. Caroline stayed the weekend a buffer between me and my thoughts. We gardened, went shopping, and talked late into the night like we had as girls sharing a bedroom. She never once said, "I told you so," though she'd been warning me about Thomas and Rebecca for years. Instead, she helped me plan for the main trip I was saving for, suggesting lighthouses to visit and coastal villages to explore. Sunday evening, after Caroline left the house, felt emptier than before. I busied myself preparing for the week ahead, laying out clothes for the botanical garden trip, with the garden club watering the tomato seedling Walter had given me, checking my calendar for appointments. Normal life continuing despite the upheaval. Monday morning brought rain and a call from Detective Morales. "We've made progress in your case, Mrs. Wells. We've traced the credit card applications and the attempted bank transfer. They were both initiated from your son and daughter-in-law's IP address using your personal information." I gripped the phone tighter, a part of me still hoping there had been some misunderstanding. "So it was definitely them." "Yes, ma'am. We're bringing them in for questioning today. I wanted you to know before it happens." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table watching raindrops race down the window panes. I remembered Thomas as a child doing the same thing, betting on which raindrop would reach the bottom first. The memory ached like an old wound suddenly reopened. The botanical garden trip with the garden club provided a welcome distraction. Laura picked me up at 11, her minivan already filled with chattering women eager to see the spring blooms. I slid into the only empty seat, grateful for the normalcy of their conversation about plant varieties and garden pests. The garden was a riot of color, despite the light rain tulips in every shade, rhododendrons just beginning to bloom, and delicate cherry blossoms floating down like pink snow. We wandered the paths in small groups, exclaiming over particularly beautiful specimens and taking photos to inspire our own gardens. Brenda fell into step beside me as we walked through a section of woodland flowers. "I heard about what happened," she said quietly, her eyes on the trilliums lining the path. "Diane told me. I hope you don't mind." I tensed, preparing for judgment or unwanted advice. Instead, she squeezed my arm gently. "You did the right thing, Margaret. I had to do the same with my daughter years ago. Hardest thing I've ever done, but she wouldn't be alive today if I hadn't." Tears sprang to my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome in such a beautiful place. I blinked them away, focusing on a cluster of blue forget-me-nots. "Did it work? With your daughter?" Brenda smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening. 3 years sober now. She hated me for a long time. Blamed me for ruining her life when they arrested her. But eventually she hit rock bottom and realized she needed help. Now she says my reporting her was the best thing anyone ever did for her. The hope her words kindled was fragile but real. I'd been thinking of pressing charges as an ending the final break in an already damaged relationship. But perhaps it could be a beginning instead. Not a guarantee, but a possibility. Tuesday morning, I woke to the sound of my phone ringing. Detective Morales' number appeared on the screen, and I answered with a racing heart. "Mrs. Wells, I wanted to update you. We brought your son and daughter-in-law in for questioning yesterday. Based on the evidence and their statements, we've arrested them on charges of identity theft and fraud." The words landed like physical blows. Arrested. Charges. I gripped the edge of my bed to steady myself. Where are they now? They've been processed and released on their own recognizance until the arraignment. They're not considered flight risks. The arraignment is scheduled for next Monday. I listened numbly as he explained the legal process ahead: arraignment, possible plea deals, the potential for restitution. When he finished, I managed to ask the question burning in my throat. Did they admit what they did? A slight hesitation. "Your son initially denied everything, blamed it on mistakes and misunderstandings. But when confronted with the evidence, he admitted to the credit card fraud. He seems to believe he was entitled to the money because you'd been supporting them for so long. Your daughter-in-law was more forthcoming. She admitted to both the credit card and the attempted bank transfer." After we hung up, I sat motionless on the edge of my bed, trying to process the reality that my son was now facing criminal charges. Despite knowing it was coming, despite being the one who had initiated the process, the finality of it hit me with unexpected force. I called Walter, needing to hear a friendly voice. He answered on the second ring, and the concern in his voice when I told him what had happened was like a warm blanket on a cold day. "What can I do?" The simplicity of his offer, not advice, not platitudes, just willingness to help, nearly undid me. "Could you just come over? I don't want to be alone right now." He arrived 20 minutes later with bagels and coffee. We sat on the porch, despite the morning chill, watching birds flit among the garden beds I'd so carefully tended. We didn't talk much about Thomas or the charges. Instead, Walter told me stories about his grandchildren, his time in the Navy, the woodworking projects he was planning. Normal life continuing, reminding me that this painful chapter wasn't the whole of my story. As the day warmed, we moved to the garden where Walter helped me plant the seedlings I'd been nurturing on my windowsill. The physical act of digging in the earth, of creating something new, eased some of the tension from my shoulders. "You know," he said as we patted soil around a delicate pepper plant, "the soil accepts whatever seeds we plant. Flowers or weeds, it doesn't judge. It just provides the foundation for growth. What happens next depends on sunlight, rain, and care, things beyond the soil's control." I looked up, squinting against the sun behind his shoulder. "Are you saying I shouldn't blame myself for how Thomas turned out?" Walter shrugged his weathered hands, never pausing in their work. "I'm saying you provided the foundation. What he grew into had a lot to do with factors beyond your control, his own choices, the people he surrounded himself with, the values he embraced or rejected. You can love the seedling you planted without taking responsibility for every branch it grows. His words settled into me, not erasing my pain, but providing a framework to understand it. I'd done my best with Thomas. That his choices had led him to this point reflected on those choices, not on my worth as a mother. Wednesday brought another unexpected development. The local newspaper ran a small article about the arrests, just a few paragraphs in the police blotter section, but it named both Thomas and me. I discovered it while flipping through the paper at breakfast, and my coffee grew cold as I read and reread the clinical description of my family's fracture made public. The phone began ringing mid-morning, distant acquaintances and neighbors curious about the story, some offering genuine support, others barely disguising their hunger for gossip. After the fourth call, I stopped answering, letting the machine pick up as I retreated to the garden, where the only sounds were birdsong and the distant hum of lawnmowers. Around noon, a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. A middle-aged couple emerged, looking uncertain as they approached my garden. I stood brushing dirt from my knees, trying to place their vaguely familiar faces. Mrs. Wells. The woman stepped forward, hand outstretched. "I'm Jennifer Davis. This is my husband, Mark. We're Rebecca's parents." I froze, one gardening glove half removed. The surreal nature of meeting my daughter-in-law's parents under these circumstances momentarily robbed me of speech. I hadn't even known their names before this moment. "May we talk with you?" Mark's voice was gruff, but not unkind. "We just found out what's been happening." I led them to the porch, offered iced tea, which they declined, and waited as they settled into the chairs Walter and I had occupied so often lately. Jennifer spoke first, her hands twisting a tissue in her lap. "We had no idea, Mrs. Wells, about any of it. The money you've been giving them the wedding, and certainly not this." She gestured vaguely, encompassing the fraud, the arrests, the whole sordid situation. I waited, unsure what they wanted from me. "Absolution explanation. Thomas and Rebecca moved in with us 3 days ago," Mark continued. "They said they couldn't afford their apartment anymore because you'd cut them off without warning. We believed them. Jennifer offered to help them look for jobs. I even called a buddy about an opening at his construction company for Thomas. Yesterday the police showed up at our door." Jennifer's voice cracked. "Our home, with a warrant. They questioned our daughter and son-in-law in our living room, and we heard everything. How they'd been living off you for years. How they'd gotten married without telling you. How they tried to steal from you when you finally said enough." I wasn't sure what to say. Their pain was evident, their embarrassment acute. But I couldn't bring myself to comfort them when my own wounds were still so raw. "We've asked them to leave," Mark said firmly. "We can't have people who would do something like that in our home family, or not." Jennifer found them a cheap extended stay motel. We paid for 2 weeks. After that, they're on their own. "We wanted you to know," Jennifer added, finally meeting my eyes. "And to apologize. Not for them, they need to do that themselves if they ever come to their senses. But for whatever part we played in raising a daughter who could treat another human being this way, especially her husband's mother." Their sincerity was evident, their distress genuine. I felt an unexpected kinship with these strangers who were experiencing their own version of the betrayal I'd been living with for weeks. The gulf between the children we raised and the adults they became yawned between us, a shared wound. "Thank you for coming," I said finally. "It means a lot to know you understand the situation." We talked for nearly an hour, sharing stories of Thomas and Rebecca's childhood, searching perhaps for clues to how they had become the people who could commit such a betrayal. There were no answers, just the sad recognition that the children we loved had made choices we couldn't understand or condone. After they left, promising to stay in touch, I felt oddly lighter. Their visit had reinforced that I wasn't alone in my pain, that the failure wasn't solely mine to bear. Rebecca's parents had provided her with a loving home, opportunities, and values, yet she had still chosen this path. Perhaps Walter was right about the limits of our responsibility for the adults our children become. Thursday morning, I awakened to the unexpected sound of silence. For weeks, my mind had been churning with worries about Thomas and Rebecca, with fears about the future, with grief over the past. But today, there was a strange quiet inside me. Not peace exactly, but a cessation of the constant internal noise. I moved through my morning routine with deliberate attention, savoring my coffee, really seeing the birds at the feeder outside my window, feeling the warm water on my hands as I washed my breakfast dishes. Small moments of presence I had been missing for too long. The phone rang as I was putting away the last dish. Caroline checking in, her voice warm with concern. "How are you holding up?" I considered the question honestly before answering. "I'm okay. Not good, not healed, but okay. I'm starting to see glimmers of a life beyond this pain. We talked about practical matters, the upcoming arraignment, the credit card company's investigation, Caroline's planned visit for the following weekend. As we were about to hang up, she said something that caught me by surprise. You know what Mom used to say? The real measure of a person isn't the mistakes they make, but the courage they show in facing the consequences. You've shown more courage these past weeks than anyone I know, Maggie. Her words stayed with me as I went about my day running errands, attending a garden club planning meeting for the summer flower show, stopping by the library to pick up books about the Maine coast. Ordinary tasks that were slowly rebuilding my sense of self as someone who existed apart from the drama with Thomas. Friday brought an unexpected development. A letter arrived from Thomas, not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter on lined paper torn from a notebook. My hands trembled as I opened it, unsure what to expect. His words, angular and rushed as they'd been since he first learned to write, filled the page with an urgency I could almost feel. Mom, I don't even know how to start this. I'm angry and scared and ashamed all at once. I never thought things would go this far. I never thought you'd actually press charges. But I guess I never thought about a lot of things, like how my actions might hurt you, or what it meant that you kept supporting us all this time. Rebecca and I have been fighting really about everything that's happened. Her parents kicked us out, did you know that? We're in some crappy motel now, and I'm finally starting to understand what it means to really be on our own. It's terrifying. I'm not asking for money. I know that bridge is burned. I'm not even asking for forgiveness, not yet. I don't think I deserve it, but I want you to know I'm starting to see things differently. When the detective showed me the evidence, when he laid out exactly what we'd done from your perspective, something clicked. I've been so selfish, so entitled. I've treated you like an ATM, not a mother. I start a job on Monday. Nothing great, just stocking shelves at the grocery store on Maple Street. Rebecca's looking too. We're trying to figure out how to pay back the credit card company, so maybe they'll drop the charges. I don't know if that's possible, but we want to try. I understand if you never want to speak to me again, but I hope someday we can at least talk. I miss the mom who taught me to ride a bike and made banana pancakes on Sundays. I miss you. Love, Thomas. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words on the third reading. Not tears of sadness exactly, but of a complicated emotion I couldn't quite name. Grief mixed with hope, pain laced with the possibility of healing. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was an acknowledgement which felt like the first tentative step towards something new. I called Detective Morales to ask whether repayment to the credit card company might affect the charges. He was cautiously optimistic, but reminded me that the decision ultimately lay with the district attorney. It would certainly look favorable, he acknowledged. First-time offenders who make restitution sometimes qualify for diversion programs instead of jail time. But Mrs. Wells, I have to ask, are you reconsidering pressing charges? I considered the question carefully. Thomas's letter had moved me, but was it genuine remorse or just another manipulation now that he was facing serious consequences? I want justice, I said finally. But I also want my son to have a chance to rebuild his life, to learn from this. If repaying the debt and accepting responsibility can be part of that process, I'm in favor of it. The weekend passed in a blur of activity, a community garden cleanup event, Saturday morning dinner with Walter that evening, church on Sunday for the first time in months. Life continuing healing, beginning in small increments measured in moments of forgetfulness, in laughter that didn't feel forced, in plans made without the shadow of grief hanging over them. Monday morning arrived with a clarity that matched the blue sky outside my window. Arraignment day. I dressed carefully in a navy blue dress with a cardigan clothes that conveyed respect for the process, without drawing attention to myself. Walter had offered to drive me to the courthouse, and he arrived promptly at 8, thermos of coffee in hand. The courthouse was an imposing brick building in the center of town, its steps worn from generations of feet climbing toward justice or mercy or some combination of the two. Walter squeezed my hand as we entered, then found a seat in the back of the courtroom while I moved to the front row as instructed by Detective Morales, who nodded to me from his position near the prosecutor's table. Thomas and Rebecca entered from a side door, both looking pale and much younger than their ages in their carefully pressed clothes, Thomas in khakis and a button-down shirt I recognized as one I'd bought him years ago, Rebecca in a modest navy dress not unlike my own. They were accompanied by a public defender, a harried-looking woman with a stack of files under her arm. Neither of them looked at me directly, though I saw Thomas's eyes flick in my direction before focusing resolutely on the judge's bench. The proceedings moved quickly, charges read rights, explained pleas entered. Not guilty for now, the public defender explained, though she requested a continuance to discuss possible plea arrangements with the district attorney. I listened with a strange detachment, as if watching a play about strangers rather than the unraveling of my own family. The judge granted the continuance, set a date for the next hearing, and reminded Thomas and Rebecca of the conditions of their release. No contact with me, no attempts to access any of my accounts, regular check-ins with the court. As they were let out, Thomas finally looked at me directly. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and in that brief moment, I saw not the entitled young man who had taken advantage of me for years, but a frightened boy facing the consequences of his actions. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod before being escorted through the side door. Outside on the courthouse steps, Walter waited with Detective Morales, who approached with an update. The DA is open to a plea deal, especially since they're first-time offenders, and the credit card company reports they've already made a partial payment. If they continue making restitution and complete a financial counseling program, they might avoid jail time. Relief washed over me. I hadn't realized how much I'd been dreading the possibility of Thomas behind bars, despite my determination to see justice done. What happens next, Walter's steady presence beside me, was a comfort I was growing increasingly dependent on. Detective Morales explained the legal process ahead: plea negotiations, probation terms, restitution schedules. It would be months before everything was resolved, but the path forward was clearer now. After thanking him, Walter and I walked to his car in silence, both processing the morning's events. Instead of heading back to my house, he drove to a small park overlooking the river that ran through town. We sat on a bench watching the water flow past, carrying winter's last remnants toward the distant sea. You know what I kept thinking in there? Walter's voice broke the comfortable silence between us. How brave you are. Not just today, but through this whole ordeal. I shook my head, embarrassed by his praise. I'm not brave. I'm just doing what needs to be done. That's what bravery is, Margaret. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what's right despite it. We sat a while longer, the spring sunshine warm on our faces, despite the cool breeze off the river. Eventually, Walter suggested lunch at a nearby cafe, and the normalcy of sharing a meal, discussing ordinary topics, laughing at his stories about neighborhood antics, felt like another step toward healing. The next few weeks fell into a pattern: regular updates from Detective Morales about the case meetings with the victim advocate assigned by the court therapy sessions I'd finally agreed to start at Caroline's insistence. Small steps forward interspersed with difficult days when grief would overwhelm me unexpectedly. Thomas sent another letter, more detailed this time, explaining that he and Rebecca were both working now, living frugally in a studio apartment, attending the financial counseling sessions required by the court. He wrote about realizing how warped his thinking had become, how entitled he'd felt to my support. It wasn't a full apology yet, but it was progress, recognition of the damage done, steps toward accountability. I wrote back a short note acknowledging his efforts and expressing hope for his continued growth. I wasn't ready for more, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not yet, but I left the door open a crack, allowing for the possibility of healing over time. May turned to June, bringing warmer weather and longer days filled with garden club activities, evenings on the porch with Walter, weekend visits from Caroline. My life was rebuilding itself around new patterns, new relationships, new priorities that centered on my own well-being rather than Thomas's needs. On a particularly beautiful Saturday in mid-June, Walter and I drove to the coast for the day. Not Maine, not yet, but a small seaside town 2 hours from home where we walked the beach, ate seafood at a dockside restaurant, and watched boats bobbing in the harbor. It wasn't a date exactly, but something comfortable that existed in the space between friendship and possibility. On the drive home, Walter asked about my Maine trip, which I'd been researching and saving for since that day at the credit union months ago. Have you set a date yet? He kept his eyes on the road, his profile illuminated by the setting sun. I'm thinking September, I said. After the court case is resolved one way or another. Caroline might come for part of it, but she can only get a few days off work. Walter nodded, fingers tapping thoughtfully on the steering wheel. I've always wanted to see the Maine coastline, he said casually. Lighthouses, lobster traps, all of it. The invitation hung unspoken between us. I considered it carefully. Walter had become an important part of my life these past months. A friend when I needed one desperately, a support without expectations, a companion who valued me for myself, not what I could provide. Would you like to come? The words felt momentous somehow, a door opening to a future I hadn't imagined when this all began. His smile was answer enough, but he added, "I'd be honored, Margaret." Truly. We drove the rest of the way home in companionable silence, the radio playing softly, the evening stretching golden before us. As we pulled into my driveway, Walter reached over and squeezed my hand briefly before letting go, a gesture of affection without pressure of possibility, without demand. The final court date came in early July. Thomas and Rebecca had accepted a plea deal, guilty pleas to reduced charges, 2 years probation, mandatory financial counseling, and full restitution to the credit card company. No jail time, but a permanent record that would follow them, a consequence that couldn't be erased. I sat in the courtroom as the judge accepted the plea, as Thomas stood to make his statement to the court. His voice shook slightly as he spoke about his remorse, about the steps he was taking to make amends, about his hope to rebuild what he had broken. When he turned to look at me directly, his eyes were wet with tears I believed finally were genuine. "Mrs. Wells," the judge's voice drew my attention back to the bench. "As the victim in this case, you have the right to make a statement if you wish." I hadn't prepared anything formal, hadn't even been sure I would speak. But as I rose and moved to the podium, words came with surprising clarity. "Your Honor, what happened to me wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about family, about the sacred bonds that should exist between a mother and son. Those bonds were broken long before any fraud occurred, broken by years of taking without gratitude, of expecting, without earning, of treating love as a transaction rather than a gift." I looked at Thomas, who met my gaze steadily despite his obvious discomfort. "I don't speak today out of anger or a desire for punishment. I speak because truth is the foundation of any healing that might occur. The truth is that actions have consequences. The truth is that love without respect isn't sustainable. The truth is that growing up means facing your mistakes and learning from them." I turned back to the judge. "I support the plea agreement. I believe in second chances and the possibility of growth and change. But that growth must be earned through actions, not words, through consistent effort, not momentary remorse. I hope this experience serves as that catalyst for change, not just for my son and daughter-in-law, but for anyone who might be tempted to mistake generosity for weakness or love for obligation." The courtroom was silent as I returned to my seat. The judge thanked me, then addressed Thomas and Rebecca directly, adding his own admonishments about family responsibility and moral obligations before formally accepting the plea and pronouncing sentence. Outside the courthouse, Thomas approached cautiously, keeping a respectful distance as required by the terms of his probation. The DA gave him permission to speak with me briefly if I consented, which I did with a slight nod. "Mom, I know words aren't enough, but I want you to know I'm going to prove myself through actions from now on. I'm going to rebuild my life the right way through hard work and honesty. And maybe someday, if you're willing, I can rebuild our relationship too." I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation that had characterized our interactions for so long. Instead, I saw something new: humility, genuine remorse, the first glimmers of maturity that had been so long delayed. "I hope you do, Thomas, for your sake as much as mine." I paused, then added, "Your probation officer has my number. When you're allowed contact again, we can talk about small steps forward. But it will take time. Trust once broken isn't easily repaired." He nodded, eyes downcast. "I understand. Thank you for being here today. For everything, really. I didn't deserve a mother like you." For the first time in months, I reached out and briefly touched his shoulder. "We all deserve love, Thomas. But we don't all deserve trust. That's something you'll have to earn back day by day." Walter was waiting by the car, giving us privacy for this moment, while remaining close enough that I felt supported. As Thomas walked away to rejoin Rebecca and their probation officer, I joined Walter, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. Home. His question encompassed more than just our destination. It offered sanctuary, understanding the comfort of familiar surroundings after navigating such difficult terrain. I nodded, too drained for words. As we drove through town, past the credit union where I'd opened my New Beginnings account, past the community center where the garden club met, past the park where we'd listened to music on a spring afternoon, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending exactly, but the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. When we reached my house, my home, the garden, was in full summer bloom, roses climbing trellises, tomatoes ripening on the vine flowers, nodding in the gentle breeze. Walter walked me to the door, where we lingered for a moment in the shade of the porch. "Are you okay?" The concern in his eyes was matched by the respect in his voice. He would accept whatever answer I gave, offer support without pressure, company without demands. I considered the question carefully, taking inventory of my heart. The pain was still there, the grief for what had been lost, for the relationship with Thomas that might never fully recover. But alongside it was something else, strength I hadn't known I possessed, boundaries I now maintained with confidence, a sense of self that existed independent of my role as mother or provider. "I'm better than okay," I said finally. "I'm becoming who I was always meant to be." Walter smiled, the afternoon sun catching the silver in his hair. "That's a beautiful thing to witness, Margaret. A privilege, really." As he turned to go, promising to return later with dinner, I stood on my porch watching him walk to his car. The future stretched before me, uncertain in its details, but rich with possibility. There would be the main trip in September, garden club competitions, holidays with Caroline, quiet evenings with Walter, and perhaps eventually careful steps toward rebuilding a healthier relationship with Thomas. I went inside and opened my laptop, navigating to the folder where I'd been collecting information about Maine lighthouses. It was time to finalize those plans, to book accommodations, to prepare for the journey I'd dreamed of for so long. Not just the physical journey up the coast, but the emotional one I'd been on these past months, from betrayal to boundary setting, from hurt to healing, from defining myself through others' needs to recognizing my own inherent worth. The lighthouses I would visit had weathered countless storms, standing firm against crashing waves and howling winds, their lights continuing to shine as a beacon for those seeking safe harbor. I had weathered my own storm now, and found within myself a similar strength, not made of stone and mortar, but of wisdom hard won, and boundaries firmly set, of dignity reclaimed and self-respect renewed. Like those lighthouses, I too would continue to shine, guiding not others now, but myself, toward shores both familiar and unexplored, toward a future limited only by my courage to embrace it.